I'm Nancy, 32 female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment downtown, a place I secured through years of careful budgeting and long hours at my accounting firm. My life is a testament to structure and discipline, a world I built for myself brick by solitary brick. This story is about what happens when you discover that the people who were supposed to be your foundation were actually building a palace for someone else with the stones from your own path. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, the geography of my family was simple. There was Ethan, and then there was me. It wasn't a matter of malice, not in the overt storybook sense. It was more like living in the shadow of a much larger, brighter celestial body. Ethan was the sun, and I was a planet in his orbit, visible only by his reflected light. He was 2 years older, and from the moment he was born, he was designated the golden child. Every coup, every first step, every crayon drawing was a monumental event, archived in photo albums and retold at every family gathering. When I came along, my milestones were simply echoes of his, quieter and less celebrated. It was the law of diminishing returns applied to parenting. My father, Richard, a financial consultant, saw Ethan as a projection of his own ambitions. He spoke of Ethan's future with the same reverence he used for a rising stock index. "Ethan's got the drive," he'd say, clapping his son on the shoulder. "He's a natural leader." My mother, Helen, a part-time curator at a small art gallery, treated Ethan like a masterpiece in progress. She fussed over his clothes, his friendships, his moods, ensuring every aspect of his life was perfectly curated for success. They weren't bad people, they were just biased investors. They had put all their emotional and financial capital into one stock, and it was paying dividends in the form of social pride. The disparities began early and only widened over time. When Ethan turned 16, a slightly used but still gleaming sedan appeared in the driveway, tied with a giant red bow. My father called it an investment in his independence. When I turned 16, I got a bus pass and a lecture on the importance of public transportation for building character. For his 18th birthday, my parents announced they had set up a college fund that would cover his entire tuition at a prestigious private university. For mine, my father sat me down with a stack of student loan applications and gave me a detailed presentation on interest rates. "This will teach you the value of money, Nancy," he'd said, his tone suggesting he was bestowing a great gift. While Ethan was living in a university-adjacent apartment, rent fully subsidized by our parents, I was working 2 part-time jobs while juggling a full course load at the state university. I'd serve greasy burgers until midnight, my clothes smelling of fried onions, then stay up until 3 a.m. studying for exams. I'd call home some nights, exhausted and lonely, only to have my mother cut the conversation short. "Oh, honey, I have to go. Ethan's on the other line. He's having a bit of a crisis about his midterm paper on postmodern literature." The unspoken message was always clear. His stress was an existential crisis. Mine was just a Tuesday. This pattern continued into adulthood. After college, Ethan floated the idea of a tech startup. It was a vague concept involving apps and synergy and disruption, but my parents were enthralled. My father liquidated a portion of his retirement portfolio to provide the seed money. "You have to spend money to make money," he declared, as if quoting from a sacred text. Ethan's company, Innovatech, became the centerpiece of every family conversation. Meanwhile, I had graduated with honors and landed a junior position at a competitive accounting firm. I was proud of myself, but my achievement was treated like a footnote. "That's nice, dear," my mother said when I told her. "Stable, sensible." Sensible was the consolation prize you gave to the child who wasn't dazzling. The financial support for Ethan was endless and unapologetic. My parents co-signed the lease on his trendy downtown office. They covered his rent on a luxury condo because he needed to live in an environment conducive to creative thinking. They bought him a new, more impressive car to project an image of success, to potential investors. I, on the other hand, was meticulously paying back my student loans, living in a shoebox apartment, and driving a 10-year-old car that made a concerning rattling noise every time I went over a speed bump. Anytime I hinted at the financial imbalance, I was met with a gentle, patronizing dismissal. "But Nancy, you're so good with money," my mother would say. "We never have to worry about yo." You, it was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a punishment for my own competence. Being responsible meant I was ineligible for help. Being reckless, like Ethan, meant you were constantly laid out. His startup stumbled along for years, never quite launching a product, never quite failing. It was a zombie company, kept alive by regular infusions of cash from our parents. He was a founder, a visionary, while I was just an accountant. The titles themselves told the whole story. His was about creation and ambition, mine was about recording the successes of others. He was the star of the show, I was the stagehand working in the dark, making sure the lights stayed on. I loved my family, but it was a complicated, painful love. It was the love of someone who has spent their entire life with their face pressed against the glass, watching a party they were never truly invited to. I had accepted it, or so I thought. I had built my own world, my own success, on my own terms. I didn't need their help. But acceptance and numbness are two very different things, and I was about to find out just how thin the ice I was standing on truly was. The lifetime of being second place had hardened me, made me resilient. I had no idea how much I would need that strength. Christmas was always a difficult time. It was a mandatory performance of family unity, a time when the unspoken dynamics were amplified by festive decorations and forced cheer. For me, it meant flying back to my parents' meticulously decorated home, a place that felt more like a museum of Ethan's achievements than the house I grew up in. His framed university diploma hung in the study, his sailing trophies were polished on the mantelpiece, and photos of his latest business trips, which looked suspiciously like vacations, were plastered on the fridge. My own accomplishments were conspicuously absent, represented only by a single, slightly dusty photo of my high school graduation on a crowded side table. This year felt particularly tense. Ethan's startup had recently pivoted, a euphemism for another near collapse that required a significant five-figure loan from our father to stay afloat. Ethan, however, described it as a strategic masterstroke. He arrived at Christmas Eve dinner dressed in an absurdly expensive designer sweater, holding a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. He exuded an air of breezy, unearned confidence that always set my teeth on edge. Throughout the meal, he dominated the conversation, regaling us with tales of meetings with venture capitalists and name-dropping tech buzzwords. My father listened with rapt attention, nodding sagely, while my mother watched him with a look of pure adoration. I tried to contribute, mentioning a complex fraud case I had recently helped untangle at my firm, a project that had earned me a commendation from the senior partners. My mother smiled vaguely. "Oh, that's lovely, dear. All those numbers must be so tricky," my father grunted. "Well, make sure you're putting enough away for retirement, Nancy. A 401k is important." The conversation immediately snapped back to Ethan, as if my contribution was a brief commercial break during the main feature. I felt the familiar sting of invisibility, the quiet resignation that had been my companion for 3 decades. I retreated into myself, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate and counting the minutes until I could politely escape. The breaking point, the moment that would shatter my quiet acceptance, came during dessert. My mother brought out her famous cherry pie, and as we ate, my father proposed a toast. "To Ethan," he said, raising his glass, "for his perseverance and his brilliant vision. We know 2026 is going to be his year." We all clinked glasses. Ethan, basking in the praise, leaned back in his chair with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. He looked across the table, his eyes landing on me. There was a glint of something cruel in them, a casual condescension that he had perfected over the years. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice smooth as silk. Then, without breaking eye contact with me, he added, "It just goes to show, some people are built for success, for taking risks and building things. And some people, well, they're just not. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat but said nothing. My father just nodded in agreement, completely oblivious to the venom in his son's words. It wasn't just the insult itself. It was the context of a lifetime of insults, of being overlooked, of being deemed not enough. It was the culmination of the car, the college tuition, the subsidized rent, the endless stream of support he received and I was denied. It was the casual dismissal of my hard-won career, my independence, my entire existence. He wasn't just saying I wasn't successful. He was saying I was fundamentally incapable of it, a different class of person. And my parents, the people were supposed to love and support me unconditionally, were silently co-signing his verdict. Something inside me, a tightly wound coil of resentment I had suppressed for years, finally snapped. The polite facade I had maintained for so long crumbled away, and what was left was pure, cold anger. My hands were trembling, but my voice, when I spoke, was eerily calm. "What did you just say?" I asked, my gaze locked on his. Ethan's smirk faltered for a second, surprised that I was challenging him. He was used to me just absorbing these little jabs. "Oh, come on, Nancy," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't be so sensitive. It's just an observation." "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I want you to explain it. Explain to me what you mean by built for success." My father cleared his throat. "Nancy, it's Christmas. Let's not have any unpleasantness." "I agree," I said, turning my gaze to him. "So I'd like your son to clarify his deeply unpleasant comment." The air was thick with unspoken history. All the years of biting my tongue, of swallowing my pride, of accepting the unacceptable, it was all coming to a head right here, over a half-eaten slice of cherry pie. Ethan, seeing he couldn't charm his way out of it, doubled down. "It means I see opportunities and I take them. I'm not afraid to fail. You chose a safe path, a little job with a little life. That's fine for you, but don't pretend it's the same thing." That was it, the final, unforgivable insult. He had painted my responsible, self-sufficient life as a failure of imagination, a character flaw. And as I looked at my parents' faces and saw not defense but tacit agreement, I knew I was utterly alone in that room. The betrayal wasn't just Ethan's, it was theirs too. They had nurtured this dynamic, funded it, and endorsed it. A cold clarity washed over me. For years, I had been playing a game that was rigged against me. And in that moment, I decided I was done playing. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "Thank you for dessert," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "And thank you for the clarity. You've all made your positions perfectly clear." I walked out of the dining room without looking back, the stunned silence of my family trailing behind me like a shadow. As I walked out into the cold night, I wasn't just leaving a Christmas dinner. I was leaving behind the role they had cast me in. The performance was over. The days after Christmas were a blur of cold fury and profound sorrow. I had booked the earliest flight back to my city, needing the physical distance to process the depth of the betrayal. I ignored my mother's tearful voicemails and my father's terse texts demanding I apologize to Ethan for ruining Christmas. Their reactions only confirmed what I already knew. In their eyes, my pain was an inconvenience, while Ethan's ego was a precious artifact to be protected at all costs. I spent a week in a self-imposed isolation, my apartment feeling like both a sanctuary and a prison. The anger was a constant, simmering fire, but I didn't know what to do with it. Revenge felt like a fantasy, a plot from a movie, not something that happened in the real world of spreadsheets and tax codes. It was during this period of emotional limbo that I decided to tackle a long-procrastinated task, sorting through the boxes my paternal grandmother, Evelyn, had left me when she passed away 2 years prior. Grandma Evelyn had always been my champion. She was a quiet, observant woman who saw the family dynamic with piercing clarity. While my parents were fawning over Ethan, she was the one who would slip me a $20 bill, whispering, "For you, Nancy. Just for you." She'd call me every week at college to check in, her gentle voice a lifeline in my lonely, overworked world. Her death had left a huge void, and I hadn't been able to face going through her belongings. Now, I needed the distraction. The boxes were filled with the usual keepsakes: photo albums, knitted blankets, her favorite porcelain teacups. In the bottom of the last box, beneath a stack of old magazines, I found a large, sealed manila envelope. My name was written on the front in her familiar, elegant script. My heart began to pound. I carefully tore it open. Inside was not a sentimental letter, but a collection of official-looking documents: bank statements, a copy of a will, and a thick, handwritten letter bound with a blue ribbon. I untied the ribbon and began to read. The letter was dated just a few months before she died. "My dearest Nancy," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hope you will not be too sad. I have lived a long and full life. I am writing to you because there are things you need to know, things your parents and I did not see eye to eye on. I have watched you grow into a remarkable, self-reliant woman, and I have also watched, with a heavy heart, as your brother has been handed everything on a silver platter while you have had to fight for every scrap. It was a source of great and lasting disagreement between your father and me." My hands started to shake as I continued reading. Grandma Evelyn went on to explain that she had come from a family of modest means, but through a lifetime of frugal living and a few shrewd investments her own father had made, she had accumulated a substantial amount of money. Her intention was always to leave it to her grandchildren. But she had seen how my parents managed their finances, constantly propping up Ethan's ventures while ignoring my needs. She feared that if she left the money to be distributed by my father, my share would inevitably be diverted to fund Ethan's next failed idea. So, she had made a different plan. The letter detailed the existence of a trust fund, a separate, legally ironclad trust she had established years ago with the help of her own independent lawyer. The sole beneficiary of this trust was me. She had been making regular deposits into it for over 20 years, a secret legacy built from her own savings and investment dividends. The accompanying bank statements confirmed it. I unfolded the latest one, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers until they landed on the final balance at the bottom of the page. I had to read it 3 times to believe it. It was a staggering amount, well into 7 figures. It was more money than I could have ever dreamed of earning in a lifetime. I sank to the floor, the papers clutched in my hand, my mind reeling. But there was more. The second part of her letter was a warning. She explained that she had also, in her official will, the one my father had executed, left a significant sum of money to be split equally between Ethan and me. This was the inheritance my parents had told me about, a modest amount that, after estate taxes and fees, had dwindled to a few $1,000s for each of us. I had accepted it at the time, grateful for anything. Now, Grandma Evelyn's letter painted a much darker picture. "Richard was the executor of my will," she wrote. "I trusted him to do the right thing, but I fear his loyalty to Ethan's potential may have clouded his judgment. He has a weakness for your brother, Nancy. I want you to look into this. You are smart. You know how to follow the numbers. Don't let them take what is rightfully yours." The final document in the envelope was a copy of that official will. It clearly stated that her remaining estate, a sum of $500,000, was to be divided 50-50 between her 2 grandchildren. I had received a check for $5,000. What had happened to the other $245,000? A cold, sickening realization washed over me. The estate taxes and fees were a lie. My father, the executor of the will, had taken my inheritance and almost certainly given it to Ethan. He hadn't just favored my brother, he had actively stolen from me to do it. The Christmas insult was the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface was a decade of financial deception, a betrayal so deep it took my breath away. The discovery of the secret trust was a miracle, a gift from the one person who had always seen me. But the discovery of my stolen inheritance was a declaration of war. My grandmother had given me the truth, and with it, a mission. And as a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how to begin. For a forensic accountant, a discrepancy isn't just a mistake, it's a thread. If you pull on it gently, with patience and precision, you can unravel an entire tapestry of lies. My father had stolen nearly $250,000 from me, and my grandmother's letter was the thread I needed. The fury and grief I felt were still there, but now they were channeled into a cold, focused purpose. My apartment transformed from a place of mourning into a war room. I pinned my grandmother's will to a corkboard, along with the paltry check stub I had received 2 years ago. This was not just about money anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the truth of what had been done to me. My first step was to approach this with professional detachment. I was no longer Nancy the hurt daughter. I was Nancy the investigator. I started with the public record. As the executor of my grandmother's will, my father was required to file an inventory of the estate and a final accounting with the probate court. These are public documents. I spent a morning at the county courthouse, my heart pounding as I requested the file for Evelyn Miller's estate. The clerk Kay handed me a thin folder. As I sat down at a quiet table and opened it, my blood ran cold. The final accounting was a work of fiction. The document, signed by my father under penalty of perjury, was riddled with inflated expenses and fabricated debts. There were legal fees paid to a firm that, a quick search on my phone revealed, didn't exist. There were outstanding medical bills that were 10 times higher than what my grandmother's excellent insurance would have ever allowed. There was a ludicrous executor's fee that my father had paid to himself, amounting to nearly 20% of the estate's value, far beyond the legal limit. After all these padded costs, the document claimed the remaining amount was a mere $10,000, which he had dutifully split between Ethan and me. He had created a paper trail so brazenly false he must have been convinced I would never think to look. He had counted on me being the sensible one, the one who didn't ask questions. He had underestimated me completely. The next phase of my investigation required a more delicate touch. I needed to trace where the money went. I knew my father. He was a creature of habit, especially with his finances. He likely would have transferred the funds from the estate account into his own, then funneled them to Ethan. Getting his bank records was impossible without a subpoena, but I had another idea. Ethan. His life was an open book of financial irresponsibility, and I suspected he wasn't nearly as careful about covering his tracks. I remembered my mother mentioning the name of Ethan's startup, Innovatech Solutions. He had registered it as a limited liability company, LLC, which meant some of its filings were public. But more importantly, I knew Ethan. His ego was his greatest weakness. He loved to talk about his business. Over the years, I had tuned it out, but now I replayed every conversation, every boastful monologue, searching for details. I remembered him mentioning his company's bank and the great relationship he had with his business manager there. This is where my professional skills came into play. I couldn't access his bank account directly, but I could look for the ripple effects of a large cash injection. A sudden influx of $490,000, my stolen share plus his own, into a floundering startup would leave a mark. Did he hire new employees, lease a bigger office, purchase expensive equipment? I started digging into Innovatech's digital footprint. I scanned through old social media posts, press releases that went nowhere, and archived versions of his company website. And then I found it. On a local business registry website, I found the public filing for Innovatech's annual report. And listed in the filing, from approximately 3 months after my grandmother's passing, was a capital contribution of a very specific, very interesting amount, $490,000. It wasn't listed as a loan from our father. It was listed as an investment from a holding company I had never heard of. A quick search of the holding company's registration led me to its sole director, Richard Miller. My father. He hadn't even bothered to be subtle. He had created a shell company to funnel my inheritance directly into Ethan's failing business, disguising it as a legitimate investment to make Ethan look more credible to other potential investors. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, premeditated act of theft and deception. He had systematically dismantled my inheritance, falsified legal documents, and lied to my face, all to prop up my brother's fantasy of being a tech mogul. The pain of this realization was sharp and deep, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of steely resolve. He had left a trail of evidence a mile wide, confident that no one in his family would ever have the skills or the audacity to follow it. I spent the next 2 weeks compiling my findings into a meticulously organized dossier. I printed out the fraudulent probate filings, the registration for my father's shell company, the Innovatech annual report showing the capital contribution, and created a timeline that linked every transaction, every document, every lie. I cross-referenced dates and amounts, adding annotations and explanations. The final file was thick, damning, and irrefutable. It was a forensic accountant's masterpiece, a symphony of evidence that would be impossible to deny. The investigation was complete. Now, it was time to find a conductor to help me play it. I looked up the number for the most respected estate lawyer in the city. It was time to make an appointment with Mr. David Chen. Walking into David Chen's office was like stepping into a different world. The quiet, wood-paneled room was lined with leather-bound legal books, and the air hummed with a sense of calm, intelligent authority. It was a world away from the emotional chaos of my family. Mr. Chen was a man in his late 40s with sharp, observant eyes and a demeanor that was both reassuring and formidable. He listened intently as I laid out my story, from the lifelong favoritism to the Christmas dinner to the discovery of my grandmother's letter. I spoke calmly and factually, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. When I finished, I pushed the dossier I had compiled across his large mahogany desk. "This is what I found," I said simply. For the next 20 minutes he was silent, his full attention on the documents. He turned each page slowly, his eyes scanning every line. I watched his expression, looking for any sign of doubt or dismissal. Instead, I saw a flicker of professional appreciation, then a growing look of grim confirmation. When he finally looked up, his expression was serious. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice even. "This is one of the most comprehensive and flagrant cases of executor misconduct I have ever seen. Your father didn't just bend the rules, he committed perjury and fraud. What he did was illegal." The word illegal hung in the air, both terrifying and validating. Hearing a legal expert confirm my suspicions solidified my resolve. "What are my options?" I asked. Mr. Chen leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "There are several paths we can take. The most aggressive would be to file a criminal complaint for fraud and embezzlement, along with a civil suit to recover the funds and petition the court to have him removed as executor. Given this evidence, he would almost certainly face prosecution. The thought of my own father facing criminal charges was sobering, but the image of Ethan's smirk at the dinner table flashed in my mind, and the hesitation vanished. "But," Mr. Chen continued, "that path is public, messy, and can take years. The emotional toll on you would be significant." He paused, gauging my reaction. "There is another option, a private confrontation. We can leverage this evidence to force a settlement. It would be faster, quieter, and would give you more control over the outcome." This was the path I had been leaning towards. A public trial would drag my grandmother's name through the mud and create a public spectacle. I didn't want a circus, I wanted justice. I wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions, to see the edifice of lies they had built crumble before their eyes. "What kind of settlement?" I asked. "Full repayment of the $245,000, plus interest accrued over the past 2 years, Mr. Chen stated. "We will also demand he pay all of your legal fees, and we will draft a legal agreement, a contract, that stipulates he and your mother are to have no further involvement in your financial affairs, including any future inheritance. Essentially, we sever the financial ties completely." He then added a crucial piece. "Given that the stolen funds were invested directly into your brother's company, the repayment should come from that source. We will demand that Ethan's company, Innovatech, be held responsible for returning the misappropriated capital." This was brilliant. It meant the consequences would fall squarely on Ethan, the person who had benefited from the fraud. His precious startup would have to pay for his sins. The plan began to take shape, and it was as elegant as it was devastating. We wouldn't just send a letter. We would choose the time and place for maximum impact. We needed a moment where they were all together, comfortable and complacent in their world, just as they had been at Christmas dinner. "When is the next time your whole family will be together?" Mr. Chen asked. An idea, cold and perfect, formed in my mind. "Next Christmas," I said. "They always host a big dinner on Christmas Day." Mr. Chen raised an eyebrow. "You're willing to wait a year?" "I've waited my whole life," I replied. "Another year to make sure every detail is perfect is nothing." The long timeline would work to our advantage. It would give us time to prepare, to get our documents in order, and to let them sink even deeper into their comfortable delusion. It would also be poetically just. The scene of my greatest humiliation would become the stage for my vindication. Over the next 11 months, I communicated with my family as little as possible. I sent polite, brief responses to my mother's texts and ignored my father's calls. I told them I was busy with a major project at work, which was technically true. My project was them. I worked with Mr. Chen to draft the legal demand letter and the settlement agreement. Every clause was a work of art, legally airtight and mercilessly precise. It detailed my father's fraudulent actions, citing the specific statutes he had violated. It traced the money from the estate account to his shell company and into Innovatech. And it concluded with our non-negotiable demands. As the holidays approached, I received the expected invitation to Christmas dinner. "We're all hoping you'll be in a better mood this year, Nancy," my mother wrote in a card. "Let's let bygones be bygones and have a lovely family Christmas." The condescension was so thick I could taste it. I replied with a simple, "I'll be there." They had no idea what was coming. They were expecting the quiet, accommodating Nancy to return, ready to resume her role as the family footnote. They were about to meet the real Nancy. On the morning of December 25th, I reviewed the final plan with Mr. Chen over the phone. He would arrive at my parents' house at precisely 6:05 p.m., 5 minutes after dinner was scheduled to begin. He would be my uninvited guest. The stage was set. The script was written. All that was left was the performance. I walked into my parents' house on Christmas Day feeling a strange, surreal calm. The house was decorated just as it always was, the oversized tree glittering with my mother's collection of antique ornaments, the scent of roast turkey and pine needles filling the air. It was a perfect portrait of family harmony, a beautiful lie. My mother, Helen, greeted me with a hesitant hug, her eyes searching my face for any sign of lingering resentment. My father, Richard, gave me a stiff, awkward nod from across the room. And Ethan was in his element. He was holding court in the living room, a glass of expensive scotch in hand, bragging about a new round of funding he had supposedly secured for Innovatech. I played my part, smiling politely and making small talk. I complimented my mother's decorations and asked my father about his golf game. I endured Ethan's smug monologue, nodding along as if I were impressed. To them, it must have looked like a victory. Nancy had come around. The unpleasantness from last year was forgotten, and the family's carefully constructed hierarchy was back in place. They had no idea they were actors in a play, and the fin. Al act was about to begin. We sat down for dinner at 6:00 p.m. sharp. My father carved the turkey, and my mother passed around the side dishes. The conversation was light and superficial. As the clock on the mantelpiece ticked past 6:04, I took a slow sip of water, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. At exactly 6:05 p.m., the doorbell rang. My mother looked up confused. "Are we expecting someone else?" she asked. My father grumbled, "Probably just carolers." "I'll get it," I said, standing up from the table. My family watched perplexed as I walked to the front door. I opened it to find Mr. David Chen standing on the porch, holding a leather briefcase. He looked immaculate in a dark suit, his expression neutral and professional. "Mr. Chen," I said calmly. "Thank you for coming. Please come in." I led him back to the dining room. 3 pairs of eyes stared at us, a mixture of shock and suspicion. My father was the first to speak, his voice sharp. "Nancy, who is this?" "This is Mr. David Chen," I replied, my voice clear and steady. "He's my lawyer." The word lawyer sucked all the air out of the room. My mother dropped her fork with a loud clatter. Ethan's face, which had been flushed with self-satisfaction, went pale. My father's eyes narrowed. A lawyer? What is the meaning of this? You're interrupting our Christmas dinner. Actually, Mr. Chen said, his voice cutting through the tension, we're here to discuss a matter of significant financial importance. Specifically, the estate of the late Evelyn Miller. At the mention of my grandmother's name, my father's face turned ashen. He knew. In that instant, he knew exactly what this was about. I have no idea what you're talking about, he blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Mr. Chen placed his briefcase on the sideboard and clicked it open. He pulled out a thick document, our demand letter, and a copy of my entire dossier. He handed the letter to my father. I believe this will clarify things, he said. My father took the papers, his hands trembling slightly. He began to read. I watched as his eyes scanned the first paragraph, the one that outlined his fraudulent actions as executor and cited the criminal statutes for perjury. His face, already pale, seemed to crumble. My mother, seeing his reaction, whispered, "Richard, what is it?" He didn't answer. He just kept reading, his breathing becoming shallow. Ethan, seeing our father's distress, stood up. "What is this nonsense?" He demanded, trying to project his usual bravado. "What are you accusing him of?" "We're not accusing him of anything, Mr. Miller," Mr. Chen said coolly. "We are stating facts. The fact that your father, as executor of your grandmother's will, falsified the estate's final accounting to defraud my client, his own daughter, of her rightful inheritance of $245,000. "That's a lie," Ethan sputtered. "We got our inheritance. It was $5,000 each." "Yes," I said, speaking for the first time since we sat down. "That's what he told me, too." But Grandma's will, the real one, stated her $500,000 estate was to be split evenly. Funny how that works out. Mr. Chen then turned his attention to Ethan. "The facts also show," he continued, "that the stolen funds, along with your own share, were funneled through a shell corporation set up by your father and deposited as a capital contribution into your company, Innovatech Solutions." He slid a copy of the Innovatech filing across the table to Ethan. The exact amount was $490,000. That's a very specific number, wouldn't you agree? Ethan stared at the document, his mouth opening and closing silently. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by the panicked look of a cornered animal. He knew it was true. He had been complicit in the whole scheme. My mother started to cry softly. "Richard, is this true? Did you do this?" My father finally looked up from the papers, his face a mask of defeat. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a powerful patriarch. I saw a weak, pathetic man who had been caught. He couldn't even meet my gaze. He just stared at the tablecloth, his world collapsing around him. The silence stretched on, broken only by my mother's sobs. The delicious Christmas dinner sat on the table, completely forgot. The festive atmosphere had curdled into a funereal gloom. This wasn't a family dinner anymore. It was a deposition, and everyone was guilty. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a scene of utter collapse. My father remained silent, a statue carved from shame, staring at the demand letter as if it were a death sentence. My mother's quiet sobs had escalated into full-blown, hysterical crying. "How could you, Richard? How could you do this to our family? To Nancy?" she wailed, her words punctuated by gasps for air. It was a good performance, but I knew the truth. She was crying not for the betrayal of her daughter, but for the destruction of her perfect family Mage, she was mourning the loss of the illusion she had so carefully curated for decades. Ethan was a different story. His panic quickly morphed into a desperate, sputtering rage. "You can't do this," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You'll destroy Dad, you'll destroy my company, this is everything we've worked for." The "we" was particularly telling. He still saw his success and our parents' finances as one and the same. "You mean everything they worked for and that I paid for," I corrected him, my voice flat and cold. "Your company was built on stolen money. My money." Mr. Chen stepped in, his calm authority a stark contrast to the emotional chaos. "The terms are on the last page," he said, addressing my father directly. "You have 30 days to wire the full amount of $245,000, plus interest, from Innovatech's accounts to my client. You will also wire the funds to cover all legal fees. If the payment is not received in full by the deadline, we will file our civil suit and hand over this dossier to the district attorney's office. The choice is yours. He snapped his briefcase shut. I will see myself out. My contact information is in the letter. With a nod to me, he turned and left, leaving a mushroom cloud of silence in his wake. I stood up to leave as well. My mother looked at me, her face streaked with tears. Nancy, wait, please don't do this. We can talk about this. We're a family. A family? I repeated the word, and it tasted like ash in my mouth. This isn't a family. It's a business where I was the only one paying taxes. The time for talking was every day for the last 30 years. It's over. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant or joyous. I just felt empty. The anger that had fueled me for a year was gone, and in its place was a vast, hollow quiet. The battle was won, but the war had left scars on everyone, including me. True to Mr. Chen's prediction, they didn't fight. The risk of public humiliation and criminal charges was too great. 2 weeks later, the full amount, including interest and every penny of Mr. Chen's fees, appeared in my account. The wire transfer notification from Innovatech Solutions was the most satisfying email I had ever received. I later heard through the grapevine that to make the payment, Ethan had to liquidate most of his company's assets and lay off his small team of employees. His disruptive startup, built on a foundation of lies and theft, had imploded. He was forced to sell his luxury condo and move into a small rental. For the first time in his life, the golden child was tasting failure without a safety net. My father and mother tried to reach out. There were letters, emails, voicemails filled with apologies that felt hollow and self-serving. They weren't sorry for what they did, they were sorry they got caught. They had broken my trust so completely that there was nothing left to rebuild. I never replied. I had redrawn the lines of my family, and they were no longer inside them. It's been a few years since that Christmas. The money, both the returned inheritance and the trust from my grandmother, sits mostly untouched. I used a small portion to buy my own condo, a bright, sunny place that is entirely mine. But the real inheritance my grandmother left me wasn't the money. It was the truth. It was the validation that I wasn't crazy, that the unfairness I felt my whole life was real. Her legacy gave me the power to stand up for myself and reclaim my own story. I still have a family. It's a chosen one, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, close friends, trusted colleagues, and Mr. Chen, who has become a mentor and friend. I learned that biology doesn't make a family, love, trust, and accountability do. My old family's Christmas photo now sits in a box somewhere, a relic from a life that no longer belongs to me. I don't know if they still celebrate, but I do. My holidays are now quiet, peaceful, and filled with people who see me for who I am, not for who they need me to be. I am no longer in anyone's shadow. I am my own source of light.